Hello. Welcome to Title IX, Impacts to Women and Girls from Biden Administration Changes. I'm Nancy Stade. I'm on the board of the Women's Liberation Front, or WOLF, the host of this webinar. After receiving close to 240,000 public comments, the Department of Education dropped a regulation of 1,500 plus pre-publication pages in length. The regulation, non-discrimination on the basis of sex in education programs or activities receiving federal financial assistance, came out in the early hours Friday morning, as if they thought no one would notice an attack on historic Title IX protections. It's safe to say they were wrong. To talk about the impact on the sex-based rights of women and girls, we have a panel of women, all leaders in the fight for Title IX as attorneys, advocates, and athletes. Let's start with introductions. Well, why don't we start with Kim, and then we can just go across the screen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Russell. My background is I played two sports at the D1 level back in the day. So Title IX made a huge difference in my life and allowed me to get a college scholarship and make my college years cheaper than my high school. I've been a lacrosse coach at every level from youth to international for 28 years. I'm currently on the Women in Sport Commission for World Lacrosse. So I have some input on policy at that level. And I am also currently an ambassador for the Independent Women's Forum and very happy to be fighting this fight. Not happy that we have to have it, but grateful that I get to be a part of it.
I'm Doreen Denny with Concerned Women for America, and I've really had a privilege of working with Wolf for about 6 years now. We're grateful as an organization that we've been able to be in partnership. I'm the mother of two athletes. I was petered out as an athlete in my early years, but my son was an NCAA college player. My daughter was also in elite sports and club sports while she went through high school. And so I've had the privilege of just being like working alongside you in this fight. I mean, it's taken so many dimensions from the Equality Act we were fighting in Congress 6 years ago to where we stand today with the Biden administration. So grateful to be with you all, and thank you for all that you're doing.
Hi, my name is Adriana McLam. I am a former Division I athlete in volleyball at both Rutgers and then Florida International University. I was also an international women's player playing for Team Florida, and now have the joy of coaching for my 4th year there, where we're actually going for our 4th gold medal this year as a returning coach. And I also serve as a recruiting coordinator at the top volleyball club in Florida. And lastly, but most importantly, I am currently the marketing director at Independent Women's Forum, where we do a lot of work on Title IX and women's sports issues.
Lauren and then Marshy.
Okay. I'm Lauren Bone, Lauren Adams, formerly. I'm Wolf's legal director. I've been with Wolf in some form for about 3.5 years now. And so I do a lot of work here on Title IX and also work on issues with women's prisons, do amicus briefs in all kinds of cases related to women's rights, especially with respect to gender identity. So for detransitioners, protecting children from medical harm, and all of those things. Yeah. Did you want me? I see that we didn't.
Let's have Marshy's introduction, and then we'll go from there.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marshy Smith. I'm a former swimmer at the University of Arizona, where I won an NCAA swim championship title 100 years ago. But when I watched what transpired a little over 2 years ago, watched Riley's race and Leah Thomas standing on the top step where I once stood, I was totally devastated. My teammates wrote a collaborative letter to the NCAA, which we released publicly, and I've been launched into an activist, an accidental activist position ever since. I'm so grateful to work with all of these women here, really from the start, but I connected with Kim Jones, who is the other co-founder of Icons, the Independent Council on Women's Sports, to be the voice of female athletes, to combat discrimination against us and our sex. So I'm just so grateful to all of you. Lauren actually helped write a legal demand letter for us, which all of these groups have signed on to a little over a year ago, where we promised to hold the NCAA accountable to the law when they discriminate against current athletes in the NCAA. They thought we were bluffing, and just last month, led by Riley, there were 16 female athletes who have now mounted a lawsuit against the NCAA for discriminating against women in their collegiate sports. So very excited to have such a powerful group with us, but also very devastated at what the Biden administration is doing with Title IX.
And Riley, let's turn to you, and then we'll get started.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited to be on this call. These ladies right here are some of my most favorite ladies, of course, in this fight, but really much broader than that. So very grateful for all of you and your fight this past 2 years. Some of you much longer than that. But speaking for myself, 2 years. It was just 2 years ago that I raced Leah Thomas, as Marcy alluded to. Of course, right? This is a 6'4" man who swam 3 years in the men's team before switching to the women's team, where, to be honest, he sucked as a man. Not really. He was very mediocre as a man, but then became a dominant woman, breaking records, Ivy League records, pool records, winning a national title, which is the pinnacle of women's collegiate swimming. After facing this, after, of course, experiencing the unfair competition, the locker room, the silencing that we faced from our universities, all of these things combined, I mean, I really felt guilty is how I felt. I felt responsible because I had participated in this farce. I felt compelled, knowing that, I have a younger sister. I've been married for 2 years. I can only hope to have a daughter of my own one day. Understanding all these things, that's ultimately what led me to find my voice, which has been, gosh, a crazy 2 years. We have seen, of course, this issue progress in a way where unfortunate circumstances have transpired, right? More girls have been exploited in locker rooms. More girls have lost out on opportunities. More girls have been injured in their sports. But really, on top of all the negative, we have seen a ton of traction and momentum and wonderful things being done to combat this movement. Again, most of which led by the amazing ladies on this call. Honored to be a part of you guys. I'm an ambassador with the Independent Women's Forum now. As Marcy said, signed on to the lawsuit suing the NCAA, which I am very excited about. Really, this is a lawsuit that is the first of its kind. So again, just very grateful and super excited for this conversation tonight.
And Riley, I understand as a measure of your dedication to being here, it's actually a special day for you. So happy birthday, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm 24. I'm old.
Ancient.
I'm ancient.
So let's get started with you, Lauren, and let's lay the groundwork for what is Title IX and what is it meant for women and girls in educational institutions?
Thank you, Nancy. So what is Title IX? I think is a big question. There's been documentaries. You could have a whole thing just on the background of what it is. But in a nutshell, Title IX was passed in 1972. It's the educational amendments. It amended some other educational laws. And it said that recipients of federal financial assistance, which is mostly schools, under that statute, it says no person in the United States shall be on the basis of sex excluded from participation in be denied the benefits of, or be subject to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So that is the text of it. We talk a lot about athletics, and in more recent years, there's been a lot of focus in the post-secondary context on sexual harassment and sexual violence as well. But at its core, at the beginning, it was meant to address baseline discrimination against women and ensure equal educational opportunities for both sexes in education. It was meant to halt and remedy discrimination against women in education. So it's a very deep thing. And it applies to every aspect of education: admissions and recruitment, pay disparities, comparable facilities, course offerings, access to extracurriculars, things like that. So, and in terms of federal funding, this also includes being able to have your students receive federal loans. And so it applies to most schools, basically. That said, so this prohibited most discrimination, but from the very beginning, they recognized that some differential treatment on the basis of sex is necessary to meet that goal of ensuring equal access to educational opportunities. So things like single-sex athletic teams is a means to achieving equality in access to student athletics. Likewise, bathrooms, locker rooms, showers that are single-sex are necessary for women and girls. And actually, every student wants privacy, like, you know, for the most part, but being able to use those facilities, living accommodations, including things like social sororities and fraternities, and all of those other kind of things that they recognized from the very beginning. Everyone used to know that we needed these things in order to be equal, that it wasn't, you couldn't have things that weren't distinguishing. So really there's, you know, I know that there's people on the panel who are going to talk about the impact that that's had on athletics, but just as a general thing, it has majorly just changed the type of recourse that's available for women experiencing discrimination in education in a really big way. When it was passed, there was it was around 40%, I think it was 42% of students were women, and by 1980 that was equal, and I think now it's like 60% or a little more even. And so there was really dramatic gains made right at the beginning, just from being able to have those remedies and being able to assert your rights with your school and all of that. And so I think that's my baseline introduction to Title IX.
Great. So that's the Title IX backdrop for Friday's rule. And what does this rule do? It does many, many things. It's a big rule, and some of the things may even benefit women and girls in publicly funded education. But we're going to limit this discussion to one piece of the rule, and that's under the scope section. It says, discrimination on the basis of sex includes discrimination on the basis of gender identity. As we'll see, the effect of this is to gut sex-based protections for women and girls. But the assault on Title IX didn't start with Friday's regulation. In fact, it didn't start with this administration, but it's fair to say they've doubled down on protecting the religious belief in gender identity over the physical reality of being female. So I'm going to give a quick overview of developments in the last several years, specifically related to Title IX. Biden's first day in office, he signs Executive Order 13988, stating that wherever law prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, you have to read gender identity into that. This is followed by guidance effectively banning single-sex sport teams, bathrooms, and locker rooms. About half of all states in response enact state laws stating sex means sex and preserving female-only athletics and facilities. So there's a conflict. 20 states join a lawsuit challenging the guidance in district court, and they win. The court says, among other things, you can't do this by guidance, Biden administration. You need a regulation. Meanwhile, sport governing bodies have come out with their own policies. You have the National Collegiate Athletic Association refusing to step up for female athletes and kicked the can to individual sport governing bodies. By the way, as you heard, they're being sued for the Leah Thomas fiasco and other, among other things. And they're meeting this Friday, April 25, to consider their policy, and they've said they want to hear from female athletes. We're going to be including a link down below where you can tell them what you think. What should their policy be? Now, there's also the National Association for Intercollegiate Athletes. That's a smaller sport governing body in college athletics. They've stepped up in a way almost no other sport governing body has. By a 20-0 vote, they issued a policy that effectively bans males from female sports. So that's the backdrop for the rule that issued on Friday. Before it issued, there were meetings. So when a regulation that's called a significant regulation, before it issues, it goes up to the White House called the Office of Management and Budget. And there's an opportunity for any member of the public to call a meeting and tell the administration what you think about the regulation. And they got something like 160 of those requests. One of them was from me and Lauren. And we told them what we thought. And they bent over backwards to make us feel like they were listening to us. And then, of course, proceeded to issue a regulation that completely ignored everything we said. Before they issued the regulation, they canceled about 15 to 20 of those meetings that they were going to have. Why did they do that? Well, one possibility is they want to get this out as far in advance of the election as they can to be able to spin it. And so speaking of spin, also before the rule issued, there was a so-called leak from the Department of Education to the Washington Post saying, don't worry everybody about athletics. Don't worry, we know that athletics are particularly a sore spot for this gender identity philosophy. So don't worry, that's not covered. We're gonna go gangbusters with this regulation that's coming out shortly, the one that issued Friday, but it's not gonna touch athletics. That one we're going to hold until after the election. So what do you think, Lauren? Can we not worry about athletics? And what should we be worrying about? I'd appreciate if you talk a little bit about the regulation that came out on Friday in a little bit more depth, the regulation that hasn't come out yet, but that's specifically addressed to athletics, and the fight against these regulations before they were even proposed.
Thank you, Nancy. Yes, there's a lot to get into there. We're actually going to be doing some deeper analysis that we're going to be publishing too, because this is still a shorter session overall. There's a lot to unpack. So essentially, yes, they did what they said they were going to do. They've redefined sex to include gender identity in a way that very explicitly subsumes sex to have to be deferential to gender identity. So they go out of their way to say, yes, you can still have all of these, sex separated things and sex segregated and do all these things, but you have to allow people to participate in alignment with their gender identity, which is just their self-identification of their own sex, which a person could choose to be their own sex. They could choose male, female, or they can choose to be something else entirely that is neither or both or anything. So part of this co-signing this ideology too is that you can even have, as absurd it is to be able to have a male who can identify as a female for the purposes of getting access to those facilities or resources, you can even have a male who doesn't identify as female or claim to, and still be able to, if they think that their identity as they articulate it is most consistent with those things. And so I think I would want to start at a baseline level of this creates a massive existential conceptual problem. So not only does it insist that we're not allowed to have these single sex spaces, and I did not forget your request to talk about the athletics. I just wanted to touch on that first, but I think it was very clever for them to say that athletics was held back, and they had a couple of other areas where they implied that the rule didn't cover it. But I do think it's important to note that they have been enforcing many provisions of this for 3 years now, without having this rule in place. And so, like you said, they did issue this guidance. They have not withdrawn that guidance. It is still active on their website. They even have, where was they even had as an example of of something that they would investigate. This is still listed as on their website, that being told a transgender girl, so a male, being told that they would not be allowed to try out for the girls' cheerleading team because on the basis of his sex would be an example of something the school is required to investigate. Being told that he needed to use an alternative facility, and in their example, they even said if this student was told that they needed to use a single sex or a single occupancy bathroom, even that is considered a violation. So it's not even like you can't even have these third spaces. You have to allow women who are uncomfortable or students who are uncomfortable sharing mixed sex facilities. They can be allowed to use a single occupancy, so that has to be allowed. But they can't require the one person who shouldn't be there to use the alternative facilities. It's considered stigmatizing according to them. So that's a big problem. They did say that athletics was held back, but that's not their position. So that's not how they're still stating it. I think that they've left themselves enough room to be confusing. I'm sure that the recipients, the schools that are required to write and implement policies, are really unhappy about that right now. But I think the important takeaway is that they gave no quarter to anyone who wants to protect women and girls, who wants to protect women's sports, who wants to protect women's spaces. They left nothing in there that requires schools to act in any way. They only maybe give them room to do it. They give them a little bit of cover on certain things by saying that. But this guidance, which is them telling them what they're required to do, has not been withdrawn. It is preliminarily enjoined in the Tennessee versus education case, so that the lawsuit where the 20 states sued, they did find that the administration misread the Bostock opinion from 2020, which was what they were using as the basis for saying that they were constitutionally required to do it. So that is still enjoined as to those 20 states, but not to those 30 states. And so I think there's some question. We're watching to see if there's new guidance. Certainly they can issue guidance at any point saying, this is how we define sex, which is how we're currently defining it already. They could withdraw the current guidance. They could, and then we would look and see if they took any action in that case to see if they were to try and revisit the preliminary injunction. So all of those give us a sign of how they're likely to approach it, and it's giving signs to the recipient schools as to how they want them to approach it, and none of it is protective of women and girls. It's all if a school was inclined to take moves, it's risky. So if they were to do that, and there's very little room to do it, it's just where they did. There was the 2023, so last year they issued another notice of proposed rulemaking, which is supposed to just be for athletics. And so if you look at it this way, the 2022 rule attacks women and girls and athletics by redefining sex so that it could mean anything. And the 2023 proposed rule essentially turns Title IX on its head by, instead of saying that the current existing regulations had said, yes, we can use sex as a proxy. You can say we can have female only teams because we know that on average there's these differences, and so it's okay to say we're going to use sex as a proxy and have female only things because it's protecting women's rights. This does the opposite, the 2023 one, which is still in the proposed status. So that's not the one that was Friday. I know it's confusing. It's meant to be confusing. They're doing it on purpose. But it is very different conceptually. There's making it hazy as to what constitutes a female under the law, under their regulations. And then they're saying, hey, call it what you want. If you want to say that sex is going to be the basis for making these decisions, these bright line decisions, it can't cause harm to those, who want to participate based on gender identity. So the opposite of the current regulations as it applies to athletics. It literally turns it on its head. So it's egregious, and they're just, yeah. I'm not going to speculate on timing or anything like that, but it's not out yet, and they don't want us looking at it right now.
So Lauren, it sounds like it does all sorts of bad things, but what I'm hearing and what I think I want to play out, because it's just so mind-boggling, is that if a female athlete said, I'm denied the right to a single-sex sport team or a single-sex facility, they have to look outside Title IX. Title IX doesn't do anything for them, because whatever else, even if they're not mandating, single-sex athletics, they're also not disallowing universities from letting males into, or educational institutions from allowing males into female sports and female spaces.
Mm-hmm. That's very much true. Yes. So they're creating a floor where some places where they say you have to do this, and that's, things related to locker rooms and stuff. They're creating what they would like to be a very hazy situation for things like athletics, where they want it to act like it's still up in the air, but they're not acting like it's still up in the air. And anyone who's receiving federal funding knows very well from the information they're getting that it's not up in the air. And then other than that, there's just no floor of protection. There was nothing where they stepped out and said,
right,
you know what, by the way, we are going to say that it's okay to protect, living facilities or things like that. They gave us nothing on that. We didn't expect them to. It was not in the proposed rule. It's not in their talking points. It's not in the executive order, but they did finalize and not do it. I think so. I think schools have been stripped of their ability to protect women and girls. So the ones who want to step out and do those can not do so. And they've been stripped of their ability to hold schools accountable for doing so. So the risk and reward is very off.
I think there are also some consequences for free speech that I do want to get to, but let's turn now to our brilliant athletes and talk a little bit about what I want to leave it somewhat open, but I do want to touch on one other development, which is that Rimat Al-Salam, the UN Special Rapporteur for Violence Against Women and Girls, did a call for input on the topic of violence against women and girls in sport. And what I really appreciate about that call was that it framed the issue of males and female sport as a potential human rights violation. And just thinking about that, because I think often the things that women and girls are giving up in athletics from male participation are somehow discounted and not taken as seriously as they should be. So what I do want to do is I want to turn to the female athletes, all of you, and talk about what participation in athletics is meant for you as far as academic, athletic, and financial opportunities, what male competition does to those opportunities, how those opportunities might be affected by males and female lockers, or just anything from your experience or from the experience you've seen for other female athletes, how it's been affected by Title IX and how it'd be affected by this regulation. And maybe we'll go across, starting with you, Adriana.
Yeah, so the big thing as an athlete is like you give up your whole life to compete at the collegiate level, especially the collegiate level. Like and what I do now is I help other athletes like do what I did, like go play college. And without that opportunity, I would not be where I am today. I actually wrote my letter to the NCAA Board of Governors, and I started off with, I owe my career to the NCAA because I had this opportunity. I'm a leader because of it. I served on boards and like executive committees because the NCAA provided my education, and I went and did great things and playing the sport I love. And it's just the fact that you can't tell, but I'm 5'3". In volleyball, that is short. And against men, that's even shorter. And there's almost an 8-inch discrepancy in the men's and women's game. And if I had to compete against athletes who are taller, stronger, faster, I would never have had that opportunity. And for volleyball, it's a full ride or no scholarship. That's how it works, is because their Title IX opposite is football. So for me, it was, hey, I get to go to school, I get to play, I get to do what I want, and go and get my degree and further my education while doing something great. And I've experienced it as a coach at the juniors level as well. As like, I watched last summer where there was an athlete who I can't say they're a biological male, but they looked like a biological male. And I went up to the club director. I was like, hey, like, what do we do? What? And they were like, well, USA Volleyball allows this to happen. And I'm like, that kid is going to take a scholarship away from one of my athletes who I'm coaching. And like, it was a USA Volleyball All-Star event. I'm like, how is this happening right now? And so I keep this fight. I know Kim and from the coaching perspective is what we keep doing this fight, not because we personally expected it or had to deal with it, but the fact that we want the athletes who follow us to have the same opportunities we did. And we're watching that get taken away from them. And it's heartbreaking. So yeah.
Marshy, let's turn to you. And also, so you mentioned, Adriana, sometimes you may not even know you're competing against a male athlete.
Yeah.
I'd be interested in hearing any comments on that. But Marshy, I'll turn to you for however you want to respond to my initial question.
Sure. Just briefly speaking about my experience, I got a full athletic scholarship to Arizona to be part of the swim team. And at the time, I was the oldest of 4 kids. Neither of my parents had graduated from college. We were kind of the typical family living paycheck to paycheck happily, but I did not have a college fund waiting for me. So athletics was my vehicle to higher education. And same as Adriana, I mean, my sports resume is what got me in the front door to my first job and really launched my career, and gave me the confidence to do what we're all doing here now, to stand up for ourselves and learning leadership and confidence and what hard work and teamwork means. I mean, these are all instilled through years and years and years and laps in the pool. So it's a transformative, not just for women's athletics career, but really for our whole lives. And now my daughter's turning 8 tomorrow, and she's just beginning her athletic journey in tennis and swimming. And I'm devastated because she is right now, as it stands, not going to have the same opportunities that I did. And so now we're going backwards. And so just like the women here and on the call listening, we're not willing to give up like that for our next generation of daughters and granddaughters. And so that's why I am so passionate to do everything I can right now to ensure that she has the same chance at success that I did.
Riley.
Yeah. I mean, these ladies hit the nail on the head in terms of what athletics provided me. Starting swimming when I played a lot of sports growing up. I come from a family of athletes. Both my parents were Division I athletes. My dad, he's an NFL football player. My sister went to college. She played softball. She went to Ole Miss. My brother, he's in college playing football now. My youngest sister, she's an elite level gymnast. She's probably the best athlete of all of us, but I would never, ever tell her that. So sports was something that was ingrained in my family. All my uncles won Super Bowls, all that. So it was really never a question of if we were going to play sports. It was more so which sport were we going to play. And my dad was always mad I chose swimming because it wasn't like a super combative sport like football. He thought swimming wasn't a sport for the longest time. He was like, Riley, why are you doing this sport? Actually, it's not even a sport. This is just like a summer activity you do. What are you doing? But of course, he grew to understand it's a lot harder than football. So played at or swam my whole life. 18 years of my life I dedicated to my sport. So I mean, it's impossible. I can't even put into words the amount of time and the hours and the dedication and the sacrifices that you have to make to compete at and ultimately be successful at the highest level. And not just myself, right? Also my parents. They drove me to practices, which I can promise you they did not enjoy. from the time I was 12 years old to when I turned 16, driving me to practice at 4:30 in the morning. They did not enjoy that. They did not enjoy how my stomach was an endless pit, that they had to constantly stop at fast food drive-throughs to feed me, or sitting in a chlorinated pool environment for 8+ hours to watch a 30-second race. All of these were, we were willing to do these things. We knew we had to. But it taught me, it gave me the leadership to do what I'm doing now. It gave me the confidence, the security. It taught me how to set goals and work to achieve those goals, which all, again, things that I find more applicable, weirdly enough, in my life now than they were when I was swimming. All of that to be said, I imagine every single person on this call agrees that no one deserves to be denied of these things, regardless of your sexual orientation or your gender identity or your race or what sport you play. Everyone not only should be entitled to these things, but I personally encourage every single person to get involved in sports. Because again, I reap the benefits. But that being said, what we're seeing at the hands of the NCAA, at the hands of the Biden administration, at the hands of the IOC, is prioritizing inclusion over, one, safety, and two, fairness. And we cannot do that, because ultimately that's what's led us here. So, and you mentioned financial opportunities as well. I was in college during all the NIL stuff. So I was able to make money playing my sport. I was able to receive free products and different things. And again, women are now being denied those opportunities.
Kim, do you want to speak to your experience and also the experience of some of the young women you've coached?
Sure. So I would just, again, everything that the three women who have just spoken is right on. And the problem really is right now is that opportunities are being taken away from women and girls. And I'm sure many of you saw the 5 middle school girls, shot putters in West Virginia, who stood up and refused to throw the shot put because there was a male athlete. And that courage of those middle school girls, when you think of, one, how difficult it is to be a middle school girl, period, right? And the fact that they stood up and had that courage to say, no, we do not agree. We are not competing with a man, because even a middle school boy can throw a shot put further. And in this lawsuit that's going on in West Virginia, before the lawsuit even started, that boy had beaten over 100 girls, and since it had beaten over 163 more, right? And every time he steps up and somebody competes against him, he's taking the spot away from a girl. And that is what is the problem. This new rule is lies. Sex is not the same as gender. We all know this who are on this call. So I think a lot of people's questions are, what can we do? How can we make a difference here? What do we have to do, right? To make changes. And as far as the scariness of this rule is also the freedom of speech. So within this new rule, the sex discrimination and the sexual harassment, I was, removed from my position, but for just mispronouncing somebody, and how do you even know what pronoun anybody goes by anymore, right? They could go by something that's not even he, she, they. It could be a furry. I don't even know what those are. And this is just, so for speaking the truth and calling a true female she and a true male he, that's all we should have to worry about. As a coach, I can tell you, I'm 56 years old and it's hard enough for me. I'm just like, pick up your man. It's actually a girl, but that's how we talk in sports. Pick up your man or pick up your girl. And a coach could get fired for that now. They could say, oh, coach. Go ahead.
No, sorry, Kim, I thought you were done. I was just going to add very, very, very briefly about the West Virginia girls, because I've been talking with them for weeks about just how violated they feel, how this boy says inappropriate things to them in the locker room. I mean, all of this awful, horrible things. For weeks, I've had to hear it from these girls, and it breaks my heart until ultimately they decided to step down. But 20 minutes ago, this girl messaged me, again, 13 years old in middle school. And she just messaged me and she said, after practice today, our coach gave all the girls who sat out a meet suspension. She made us run in practice. It was a punishment, but she wasn't allowed to really say that. And now she's finding a bunch of different throwers to throw on the team. That is what we are up against. It like, I see red when I read things like this because people don't understand. I hear people all the time. Sorry, my dog is also barking. I hear people all the time say, you know, why don't these girls just not participate? It's because this is what we face for not participating. These girls, again, middle school age girls, their coach has now ousted them. And this is in West Virginia, of all places. Okay, so imagine in a place that is not as friendly, I'll say friendly, you know what I mean, as West Virginia. But to your point, Kim, it's not just the athletes who face this sort of intimidation and these fear tactics. It is the coaches. I'm sure there's a scenario where the coach didn't even want to respond in this way, but there's a higher up pressuring them to do so. So I just thought I would add that in there. And one more thing I forgot to mention that swimming gave me is my wonderful husband. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, Kim. Sorry about that.
No problem. It's your birthday. Interrupt all you want.
Stop
Those
it.
are really great points. And as Riley was saying, the other thing, it's a joke that they are saying that this doesn't affect sports when locker room is in the rule. And so if there's locker room in the rule, it affects sports. And the fact that they're letting fully intact males in the locker rooms, and I really don't understand that people don't recognize how this is affecting the psyche of girls and women. So you have someone like Paula Scanlon who had to change with Leah Thomas 18 times a week, seeing a fully intact male. And when we understand that there's autogynephilia, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that word right, going on, and boys and men are getting excited by being naked in a girl's locker room, this is sick. And I'm just putting it out there right now because I am so disturbed by this, that what is happening is these girls are being told to be quiet, that if they can't deal with it, they need to get psych services. And this is the opposite of what we have taught girls and women for years. And this is where I can't understand where the Me Too movement is, because when you feel in your gut that something is wrong, you are supposed to shout, you are supposed to fight or run or get help. And we're teaching these girls to be silent. So we are basically grooming them to be sexually assaulted or trafficked. So I am losing my shit, ladies, over this. Sorry, I'm
on the gender thing, on like the identity thing. And to go back to the point of that athlete last summer, it's ironically, Riley mentioned 13-year-olds, U13 is the division I coach. And we played this athlete, which the only way for us to know, I mean, I can tell you how men play differently than women, the body mechanics, everything. And as an adult who's been around it, I was like, that's a boy. And these girls were so programmed to be inclusive. My group of 13-year-olds before the game went over to the parents of the other team and asked the pronouns. Like that's what they did. And then corrected us in the huddle. And I was like, we're not doing this. I'm like, that's what you're programmed at 13 to do, is go ask someone's pronouns. And it was so shocking. And I was like, at this point, I was like, can we just win this game? Let's just focus on this game. And we pulled it out in 4 sets. And I was like, one, we should pull it out in 3. It should have been an easy match, but we had that athlete was the only reason we lost that set. I'm like, it's the adverse of, why is that the way these 13-year-olds are programmed to ask their pronouns, instead of being like, why is this not fair? Instead, let me make sure that we're using in the huddles, we're using the right naming structure. So, and that was shocking.
So first, I mean, great and horrible to hear from each of you about what you've experienced. I want to ask Lauren to talk a little bit more about the free speech aspect that Kim, you touched on. Then after that, we're going to start talking about what people can do. And I hope that part will be a little bit more gratifying. But Lauren, if we can talk about the free speech implications from sex-based harassment under the regulation.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect segue into it, because that's exactly, we were just talking, or like earlier today, and about what could happen to those girls that Riley just said actually did have action taken against them. And that is what we see. So one of the things that I think, um, there's not protection. So if you're in a public school, you are supposed to have free speech protection. You're supposed to be able to say things, and there's a tension between what is considered harassment and what is considered free speech, just in a general way. Um, One of the things that was really disturbing to see about this final rule was the way that the department discussed in their document how they grappled with the concerns that were expressed about free speech and First Amendment concerns, um, in a number of ways. One, they did not acknowledge really the lack of belief in gender identity as a valid point of view. They talked about cisgender, even though I know our comments at Wolf and many other comments talked about the many people, if not most people, who are outside that whole construct of believing in gender identity in terms of being cisgender, trans, all of those things. And we talked about how that was a problem, and they didn't even address it. And so they are very explicit that, people of all gender identities, they say, are protected. So if you're cisgender, then you're protected if you're discriminated against on that basis. But you're not protected if you say, I don't believe in gender identity. I don't think gender identity is a thing that should be protected. I don't, making those kind of statements should fall under First Amendment protection, but they don't fall under Title IX protection. So you can't say gender identity is a sexist, misogynistic concept that entrenches sex stereotypes into law and policy. And I think the government endorsing it and imposing it is a violation of my rights under Title IX and under the First Amendment against government imposing religious beliefs. And Nancy said that at the beginning. We believe that the idea of having this some inner essence that has a gender is a spiritual belief. That's not something that is, the government should be taking sides on and imposing policy on. So they're doing that. I think it's really disturbing that they're not even addressing major arguments that were made to them, that they've also had to grapple with in court and completely ignored. And so that was very concerning. They also went into depth talking about how their proposed regulations are not in conflict with existing law on First Amendment. And they laid it out. They laid it out as being, there was a number of cases they distinguished. So there was a couple of, so for example, they indicated that they can prohibit speech that is directed at, that materially and substantially disrupts school activities. They can discipline speech that impinges on the rights of other students. They can discipline speech that creates a hostile environment and invades the rights of others to receive an education free from sex discrimination, which they now define to include gender identity. So they did discuss and, sort of poo-pooed arguments about religious exercise. And so, people who's have religious beliefs that run contrary, but the idea of not having to have a religious, an explicit religious belief that runs counter to that belief is completely ignored. And it's not that they were particularly friendly towards the idea of having religious exemptions from it anyway, but they gave a nod to it. And so they did have, so one of the quotes that they used from a case was, and this is particularly true to Riley's and Kim's points and Adriana, at the elementary and secondary school level. So there's a lot of, there's sort of an additional level of consideration for academic freedom and the exchange of ideas at the post-secondary level, where they say, yes, we need to be able to have debates and stuff. They don't feel that way, and there's not case law to support that at the elementary school level, especially, but secondary to some extent as well. There, the weight goes in favor of like protecting the safety of the school environment, right? So we can appreciate that in actual situations of harassment, right, where people are actually being harassing, but they say, they quote a case that says, although this case does not allow schools to restrict the non-invasive, non-disruptive expression of political viewpoints, it does permit school authorities to restrict one particular opinion if the expression would impinge upon the rights of other students or substantially disrupt school activities. It says that prohibiting students from engaging in such harassing behavior fits squarely within the carve out to school children's First Amendment rights. They prohibit only speech that gives rise to fears of physical or psychological harm, materially affect student performance, substantially disrupt the operation of the school, or create a hostile educational environment. Now, we know what they think of as psychologically damaging, because right at the beginning of their comments, they talk about, so they say, transgender students shared being forced to use school facilities that do not align with their gender identity, feeling unsafe using the facilities, or not having access to gender neutral facilities, and that they asserted a safe educational environment is a matter of life or death. Many transgender students shared that they or their friends had attempted suicide because of the discrimination and harassment they had experienced. So this is the department's position on this. In contrast, their sole nod in the same section to the many concerns expressed by lots of organizations and commenters about women and girls feeling safe at school. They said, some commenters expressed concern that cisgender students experience discomfort at school when they are required to participate in activities and share facilities with transgender students. That's what they said. So there's many quotes. This is a 1,500-page document. It's really disturbing, but those were a couple of the highlights I picked out to share with you.
Lauren, can I add to that?
Yes.
A little bit?
Mm-hmm.
So what this also means, because of they're saying gender identity, it is a sex. So the sex discrimination and the sexual harassment, when I said the mispronouncing, if you think of the college level, again, and it could be another student. So when you think about, May Mailman said this really well on a couple of interviews she just did, but I've seen it at the college level. Yes, there have been many boys who do actually sexually assault girls, but there have been many who are also exonerated and shouldn't have been put in that position to begin with. But now you can be put in front of a board basically for mispronouncing someone, and it only has to be either severe or pervasive, meaning you say something really mean, which can, who knows, it could be mispronouncing someone. And the issue is you can't even face the people who make the charge against you. So I was called when I was at Oberlin after being the hippie love coach and having the kids who were confused about who they were coming in my office every day, having a full mastectomy, and then saying, here's my new diagnoses today. And I would just say, how do you want to feel today? Then I was called transphobic, transgressive, and unsafe. If I had been in this new rule, whatever the hell it is, I could have been taken. I mean, it doesn't matter. I was removed from my position anyway, but to the court of the college, and I would not even have the chance to face the people who charged me or see what they said. They could just say that I was a transphobe, and I don't get to see any of the evidence. So that's what's happening now.
It's outrageous. I think I'd like to turn now and to talk a little bit about what can be done and what likely is going to be done. And Doreen, I'd like to start with you. I mentioned before that Lauren and I met with the Office of Management and Budget to tell them what Wolf thinks of their rule. We submitted extensive comments. So there are these mechanisms for what they're worth for ordinary citizens being able to fight bad regulations. Doreen, I think you've done a lot of that, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. And, we all went through the process at every point we possibly could to give our input, to make our case, and this is the result, right? So at some point, I'm feeling as disappointed as y'all that even the process of engaging has led to this craziness about just dismissing our concerns and not even considering them valid. And then now having a foundational civil rights law that's supposed to be protecting us on the basis of sex now going to be used as a hammer and a weapon against the very people that it was supposed to help to start out with. And so the lawsuits, the courts are going to be a place of clash, and they need to be. But one of the things that Concerned Women for America did early on in this fight was look at the opportunity to file civil rights complaints. We filed civil rights complaints in each of the cases in which there was an NCAA athlete that succeeded on a national stage. And so starting back with Cece Telfer at Franklin Pierce University, and then June Eastwood at the University of Montana, and then Leah Thomas at University of Pennsylvania. Those complaints were directly against the universities. Our standing was not needed as like in a court of law. Our standing was an organization that was putting forward and standing for the sex-based rights of women and how they were being disproportionately impacted by the allowing for a male to take their places in a women's sport. And so that was the basis of our sex discrimination claim. It was very clean. And under the case of, having a different administration, it was the Trump administration in which we filed the first two of these cases. We got a resolution agreement out of Franklin Pierce University. They said, okay, we don't want to go forward. And there were investigations opened in all of these cases. I can't say in the University of Pennsylvania, we got it dismissed. They said there was another case that was similar. And so that's the way they were able to put us off. But the other ones had open investigations, which is what they do if there's credible facts that there could be a case of discrimination. On the face, right? A male in a female sport is a place of discrimination, especially when they're claiming to be, take the place. They previously competed as males. And so Franklin Pierce University had to pull down their policy, even though it was consistent 100% right down the line with NCAA. University of Montana, that we still have an investigation on the table. It's an unresolved case. Now we might think, what good would these civil rights complaints do now? Well, if they're not going to be acted on by this administration, which we know what their position would be, and that they would use this illegitimate rule in their favor, another administration at another time they basically fill the docket, right? And so my suggestion to us is that we look strategically at the way in which we can file civil rights complaints on the factual basis. I don't know if we need to follow their language of calling, these young women cisgender. I don't think we have to go there. But the point is, if they're going to take an objective look at even their own regulation, that we've got to be savvy in the way in which we present our facts and the discrimination that happens. And we need to be forceful, and we need to be, we really need to take a broad view of how we can inundate them in any number of cases, and stand as organizations in these civil rights complaints. Again, I'll tell you that another administration coming in with other people in charge of OCR, and elections have consequences, and we've got to be realistic about progress that could be made. But there could be an opportunity that we would have a lot of cases. Now there's 6 months. There's a 6-month deadline. You can ask for a waiver, but generally speaking, you need from an incident or a situation. There's so many that are in the press. Even these young girls now that are being punished for. There's a potential there. I mean, in this case in West Virginia, with a male athlete competing in their sport, we should be filing a complaint against this school. You send it to the Department of Education. You copy the there's portals for this. We can train people in this, or you can just write a letter. You copy the general counsel in the school district. You make it very clear. You make a big public deal about it. And some of you may recall that when it went down with Leah Thomas winning a national title, Concerned Women for America's complaint was in the news that same day, because it was a counter to what had just happened. And I think that there's interest in, and the pushback, we've got to make it public, because there's a lot of folks in the media that would like to suppress any challenge here. But I think that that's a one really strategic way for us to do that, especially in the case when, you know, the other one would be Congress, like the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. If that alone bill would become law, the department would have no basis for being able to do what it just did, even with the Supreme Court in Bostock, which of course is really no reasoning for Title IX. But statutory interpretation is what is supposed to happen in the regulatory process and in the courts. And so something as clear as defining sex, or, you know, making sure that Title IX, the differences in biological sex is what it means based on biological reality. Those are the kinds of things that we can look forward to also trying to promote. Again, in the states, we think that there's going to be a desire to overrule the state laws that we've made progress in. All of this is going to be in the courts and probably some injunctions. But I'm meaning, while we're held up in all this process, including the elections, let's look at what we can do to stand up for women and girls in the schools, in their sports. Let's make these things public. Let's just inundate them. And if we want to have, you know, if the Department of Education just wants to pass us off as, well, this is irrelevant now, you know, there's still a lot of questions that are out on the table. And I think that this is way unresolved, as much as we're feeling that they've now hit a landmark that is a huge hurdle for us to overcome at this point. But let's not just sit back and not do what we can.
Yeah, Doreen, it sounds like there might be a lot of reasons to file a complaint, even if you're not hopeful about this administration ruling the way you might want to. One is, as Lauren was saying, actually where they come out on sports isn't quite clear. It's very muddied. You know, does the rule affect sports? We know that they're not going to be mandating single sex. So, for example, a school might decide on their own, well, we want to let boys into girls' teams, even if this rule doesn't require it. Well, it seems to me, if they think there might be a complaint, that's a disincentive to schools, and the schools should know that people aren't just going to sit back and take it. So that's one reason. And the other is creating a record. Right. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and in fact, I think this is what we need to do, is challenge their veracity on saying that this doesn't relate to athletics. And so I think in the area of athletics in particular, this would be super strategic, which is why we ought to start to look at how all the ones we can file, including this case of the San Jose State University athlete that's, you know, under wraps as a woman. As a male, he's male, but under wraps in the school right now. I think all of these cases would be the reason to go ahead and file. And because right now, you're right, even though this doesn't even take effect until August 1st. So right, even under the current regime and the way that they want to say, oh, it doesn't relate. But even more so, because let's test their veracity. If they've got to go out there and defend that, oh, that's right. I mean, these they're not going to act on these complaints most likely, but the more in which we have them as a matter of public record that we can make a public case for, the better. So yeah, I see that that's probably one project that could get me excited in this particular phase right now, where we're feeling that there's so much riding against us and the courts take so long to actually get anywhere.
Can I add to that? Money talks. At the college level, I wrote to a man who had written to me after I was removed from my position, and he was an alum of RIT. Well, RIT is where there is a male running as a female who's just broken all sorts of NCAA records, surprise, surprise, for women. So I wrote to him and told him what was going on. He wrote to their president. He pulled all of his funding. He returned all the awards he had from when he was there. He pulled his name from being up for the Hall of Fame, and he called and wrote all his friends who also gave money. So those type of things are also going to make a difference at schools that depend on their donors, especially, you know, really every college depends on their donors for their athletic programs and their academic programs. So the more we can talk about this and reach out to those donors and let them know, I think that can be very powerful too. I've had lots of people asking me, how can we get more coaches and athletes involved? And I've seen in the comments here and from, you know, Riley just said it, you know, we care about people, right? And the issue with women, and it's not an issue, we are caregivers, we are lovers, we want to take care of people, we don't want people hurting. And a lot of people who are not speaking up, it's because they think they're going to cause somebody to commit suicide. You know, unfortunately, the issue is these kids who are so confused are already depressed and anxious, and they're going through body dysmorphia. It isn't taking them, you know, not letting them play a sport with who they want to. Sometimes we have to get resilient and we have to be mean, and sports is what actually brings resilience. And playing on a team with people of the same sex is really important to that. So something else that was taken away, I was told I wasn't allowed to do anymore, which I think everybody on this call should know. I was told I brought someone in twice who was an expert in the female cycle, and she was a lacrosse coach. So I got the double whammy. She taught girls how to better embrace their period. And this week of the month, you're better off doing this kind of exercise. You're better off with this kind of food. All of these awesome things, because I don't know one woman who really loves her period, right? It is not a fun time. And she's helping athletes be better. I was told at the end of that season, I could never bring her in again, and I could not talk to my players about their cycles because some of them didn't like it. And I'm laughing because it is so insane. And this is where, again, we have to speak up. We have to get this changed. And women have to speak up. And also, I know there's a couple of men on this call. We have to get the men involved because they are the dads, they're the brothers, they are the athletes who, if you are playing a co-ed sport, you're playing with, and they think it's ridiculous, right? And the issue is also there is so much complete delusion with girls who think they're going to be able to play on boys' teams. And they can't even compete on the girls' team. And they think they're going to transition and play with boys. I've seen this. I've heard it out of their mouths and just thought, what world are you living in? You don't play a minute on my mediocre team right now. How on earth do you think you're going to be playing with the boys? Sorry, guys.
Well, yeah, no, it's so true. And I wish we could have and continue with the spirit of pushback, even at the university level. I guarantee that the threat of losing federal funds, or the hammer that this administration now says that it can wage because these rules are final, is going to keep a lot of people from maybe speaking out. But again, the point is to really test them in the veracity that this doesn't touch sports, that the regulations right now regulating male and female teams should allow for that separation. And that we really are going to have to challenge the universities and challenge everybody else. Now, the menstruation talks and so forth, that if there's a trans identifying person on the team and that could, they want to come out and say this creates a hostile environment for me because I can't have a period. I mean, again, we're going to be pushing up against these kinds of debates. And there's going to be a lot of, I think, more chilling of speech right now in this era. We felt like we were gaining some ground here, and I think the waters are going to be tested. But let's go out and see what we can do in terms of challenging this sports eligibility rule that they say is not a rule, that they don't have any new rules, and see where we can get with it, and really challenge them head on and through our organizations in standing with athletes.
So
I just wanted to add, can I add one more thing about the
sure,
being kind part? Sorry. on the being kind part and getting other coaches and athletes, being kind is actually speaking the truth, right? And the highest level of actual like energy vibration is truth and authenticity. And someone is not authentic who cannot live in their own body. They're living a lie, and it's not being mean to not want them on a team that is a single sex team, period. So the truth, sticking with the truth is so kind, even when people don't like it.
That's what we'd all like to believe, that federal law is going to protect that. Right now, I'm sorry that we really have gone backwards in that. And it's, I think Lauren can attest. I mean, they dismissed every argument that would suggest that if you treat someone not in their concept of their gender identity, it creates more than de minimis harm and is a violation of federal law. That's what this rule states, unfortunately.
So right. So with that, I want to start talking about what first, I guess, the prospect for legal challenge of this rule and what some of those legal challenges might look like. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Lauren?
Sure, I can get us started on that. I think there's a lot of existing lawsuits. So the landscape of this is moving forward with those ones. We've got the new NCAA one. There's Tennessee versus Education, which is the one where 20 of our 50 states are plaintiffs, where the guidance preceding this is preliminarily enjoined. There's a question as to what's going to happen there. And we'll see which parties in those cases. Is the Department of Education going to try to get that injunction lifted based on, one of the challenges was that just doing the guidance document wasn't enough. Are they going to say, hey, we did rules now, at least as to the parts that, don't have to do with sports or don't have to do with those other things. I do think also, bringing up, there's also more than several existing lawsuits on sports challenging the state level Save Women's Sports type bills. And so those are all still out there. Those are all still interactive. The Women's Bill of Rights now in several states, which defines sex based on biology, that's going to interact with all these things, because despite many requests, the administration still didn't define sex. They simply said it includes these other things and didn't define most of those things even. So that's going to be a big thing to watch. And then there's new lawsuits that are sure to emerge. Wolf did do a rulemaking petition back in 2021 after the executive order in which the president directed agencies to promulgate rules, but before they had, and they didn't respond other than to say that, so they're required to respond, but all they said was that they were going to be doing rulemaking and that it would address it. And so one of the things we're looking at too is whether or not, analyzing whether or not this actually did respond. And it almost, to me, at first glance, looked like it went out of its way not to address any of those concerns. And so that's one thing, is there are deficiencies in the rulemaking process. And we're going to be also digging into a little bit, doing some Freedom of Information Act request to try and figure out what was going on behind the scenes while they were evaluating all of this. What comments did they receive? What did they do with those comments? All of those kinds of things. So I think that, and I think just everything, I co-sign everything Doreen said too about just having to hold them accountable and make them grapple with it. There's endless contradictions, and we need to point those out and we need to make them aware, because the other thing doing that is that schools and the ones, they have much more of a voice with them. And so if you make things hard for the people along the way, if you're forcing schools to grapple with it, they're going to insist on more. So it's putting pressure everywhere within that chain to be able to do that. And even if we had to accept males in the locker rooms, you don't have to accept inappropriate comments and behavior. And so I think I also would really encourage people, Riley mentioned the boy, Becky, who was making inappropriate comments, and that you're not allowed to do that under Title IX. You're not allowed to do that anyway, but you're not allowed to do that under Title IX. So you can report that as sex-based harassment too. It's sexual harassment, regardless of the sex of the person doing it. You're not protected. I mean, you're not supposed to be protected just because you have a gender identity claim. So I think there's going to be a lot of movement on existing things, and there's going to be new things. And I think everyone's still assessing what that's going to look like.
I think it's really important that we don't roll over and on any of this. In fact, I'm thinking about in the case of the states, either like collectively those states that are very passionate about pushing back. I mean, they might just decide how they don't need to get federal funding for certain things and say they're not going to roll over to comply necessarily, but then also reevaluating how much control is the federal government really going to have over us, over our state in any of these matters, right? And because Title IX, understand, is not just limited to education context, it actually is read into about 100 statutes. And so there's implications way beyond just education in schools in this. And I think that's going to be something else that people take a look at. But in the case of any minor that's involved in a situation like this, just to make sure that you understand in the complaint process that parents can be the filers for a minor or a complaint. But again, organizations could also come in with an understanding of the situation. Now they might have to investigate, for example, if there were lewd comments said, in their locker rooms. But we've got to stand up from the outside as much as possible and find the various mechanisms we have to stand up for athletes and for other young women that are facing this, even in the restrooms, the locker rooms. Lauren, and all three of the organizations represented here were joint filers on an amicus brief, which with a case that didn't make it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has yet to hear one of these, but it dealt directly with a school policy that wanted to make sure that they protect their multi-user restrooms on the basis of sex in Indiana. And we all joined together in that brief. And I'm looking forward to more joint projects that we can make together in this area as well, because we're going to continue to be doing that, I think, on a very regular basis now.
And as Lauren mentioned, one of the things that we're looking at doing at Wolf is we're going to be filing some Freedom of Information Act claims. It was extremely frustrating to read through the regulation where every time they talked about somebody in favor of the rulemaking, they talked about, 40 different people from 40 different states, and they were members of LGBT, blah, 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 blah. And then when they got to, the people who are opposed to the rule, it was like one grandmother said, as if somehow that discredits the regulation. It was just so dishonest, because my guess is that the balance of comments were opposed to the gender identity business. And so we're going to be looking at that. We're going to be asking for an analysis of comments from the Department of Education, along with some other things. So with that, I think we're going to be turning now to questions from folks in the audience. Is that I think, let me see here.
Nancy, I saw one about coaches, like how do we get more coaches involved?
Yeah.
In there, and for coaches and people, anybody, I would encourage everyone you can go on every college website and see the coaches' contact info for every single sport. Write to every athletic director, sports information director, everyone on that list at every school you can. Coaches, administrators, especially administrators, presidents,
especially at the schools that you have gone to, that you are an alumni for, that they keep coming back and asking you, the alumni association asking you for money. Definitely contact your schools that you've been to, as well as others.
I have lots of coaches who have reached out to me, and 96% of them are afraid to say anything publicly.
And yet almost every week you do hear somebody new coming out. So that's gratifying. Sharon, should we turn to questions now.
Yeah, if you open your Q&A window, right, you'll be able to see them. And Kim just answered the top question about getting more coaches involved. One that may be really germane to answer is what is the difference between a rule and a law, right? So Lauren, you indicated you'd like to answer this one live.
Yeah, because there was actually like 3 or 4 similar vibed questions. So I think just going over a little bit, there's so Title IX itself was a law passed by Congress, and we read out at the beginning that little 2-sentence or 1 long run-on sentence thing. Everything else we talk about with Title IX is all regulations. And so you've got Congress passes the law, and in it, the agencies or federal departments that implement the law or are responsible for overseeing it, they can create regulations with the authority to do so. And then there's a lot of stuff about, which Nancy is more of an expert on, about how that works out. And so I think one of the questions that was in there that someone asked is, what is presidential authority to act, now that there's been official rules, right? If there was. And so I think the best way to describe it is you can undo any of the guidance document. It takes nothing to sort of just issue a notice of withdrawing guidance. So we were talking about looking at the guidance that sort of speaks to those pauses in the sports issue and some of the other things that they didn't. So to where there's been some ambiguity, then there's some power to do that on the executive level. Everything else would need to be overturned either via new rulemaking, act of Congress, or court ruling it illegal.
And one other thing to think about for rulemaking is when it's challenged in court right now, and I promise not to get too geeky and technical with this, but right now we have something called the Chevron decision, which basically governs how courts look at regulations. And you look at first, okay, this regulation needs to be authorized by statute. Is there any ambiguity in the statute? If there's ambiguity in the statute, you're going to give some deference to the agency opinion. So it's not just, is this the right interpretation of the regulation? It's more, is it a reasonable interpretation? Now, importantly, that decision is actually right now being challenged, or there's a case that's challenging at the Supreme Court. There's going to be a decision on that in June. Impossible to say how that decision will come out, but there's at least a possibility that what will come out of that Supreme Court decision is less deference to agency decision-making and to agency interpretations of regulation. But either way, there's going to be squarely challenged whether the Department of Education had any business inserting gender identity into the concept of sex-based discrimination under the original Title IX law.
And Nancy, if I could just add, I was interested that in this 1,577 page document, they did address the Chevron challenges and tried to weasel them their way out of it to say, oh, this is not a major questions doctrine issue. This is we think that we have complete latitude here. And so they kind of went as far as they probably could, short of the Supreme Court making its judgment. What I'm hopeful is that the Supreme Court will look at that and address directly on certain matters, the limitations or the ways that they should be limited. And maybe with this rule, that could be something that we comment on or try to get in the public view, write some articles or something on, to have some legal analysis around, because again, the Department of Education really tried to inoculate itself from any challenge from Chevron or even a Supreme Court decision.
Okay.
All right. You also have a one that I think probably goes to probably anybody on the team, but there's concern about, is it a sex crime to expose yourself to an unwilling party, right? If we're going to do the mixed genders, mixed locker rooms, all of that, what happened to the female athletes, right? Isn't there aren't there statutes about this sort of thing, right? For indecent exposure, and what would be the route there?
Well, I can tell you how I felt. And I felt like it was a sex crime. Because again, just for context here, this is a man who looks like a man, like literally isn't fooling anyone. His feet are huge, his hands are huge. He's 6'4". The male genitalia confirmed that he was, in fact, a man. He had literally just grown out his hair. Not to mention, at the time, he was still sexually active with women. So it was kind of like this big, like, I was waiting for like the cameras to come out and be like, haha, you're on an episode of like Pranked. But they just never came out. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is real life. And so just to put you guys in our shoes, or really, think about putting your daughters in our shoes. A swimming locker room isn't a place of modesty. These suits that you put on, they're skin tight, they're paper thin. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes, of which, you know, you're fully exposed to put these suits on. Most of the times you have friends even helping you poke and prod your skin rolls into these suits. It's a very intimate setting. And I think we can all agree a locker room is not a comfortable place for anyone. But growing up as a swimmer, you almost become comfortable being vulnerable in that environment. But I can't even tell you how that vulnerability is entirely stripped when, unbeknownst to you, there was no prior acknowledgement or forewarning of this. You have your back turned, and all of a sudden, again, undressing, and all of a sudden you hear a man's voice in that locker room. It was inherent, it was innate for every girl in that changing space, whether they agreed with the issue or not of the competition piece. It was inherent for every girl to cover themselves with their hands or their towel or their clothes, and to get out of that locker room as quickly as they could. Of course, it's awkward, it's embarrassing, it's uncomfortable. Really, it's an utter violation. It was feelings of betrayal. And really, for me, myself, again, as a Christian, as a married woman, as a daughter to a father who at one point used to be really big and strong, now he's just kind of fat. I can tell you it was feelings of, it was traumatic, really. And not even necessarily traumatic because of what we were forced to see or how we were forcibly and non-consensually exploited. It was traumatic for me to know just how easy it was for those people who created these policies and enforced these policies to totally dismiss our rights to privacy. Again, without even a second thought, without even bare minimum forewarning us. And so I immediately left after I saw this was the arrangement, and went up to one of the officials on the pool deck at NCAA's. And I asked him, I said, hey, what are the guidelines for the locker room? I'm not talking about the competition. I'm talking specifically about the locker room. How is this allowed to happen? And he responded back so nonchalant, word for word, I'll never forget. He said, oh, well, we actually got around this by making the locker rooms unisex, which my first thought and what I told him was, okay, thank you for admitting that, because when you just admitted that, you admitted that Leah Thomas is a man. Otherwise, if you wholeheartedly believed this person was a woman, you wouldn't have had to change the policies for the locker room, but you did. So thank you for that admittance. But secondly, unisex. So any man, any coach, any parent, any dad, any male swimmer, not that there were any other male swimmers at that meet, any pervert, to be totally frank with you, who wanted to be in that locker room had full access. And again, we weren't even told about it. Actually, we were told, if we were to complain about this, that we were the problem. Several of his teammates, Kim mentioned Paula previously, she mentioned how they undressed with this man 18 times per week. When they were uncomfortable at the beginning of the season about the locker room piece and sent an email to their administration about it, 16 of the girls plus their parents signed on to this email. The administration responded back with, if you feel uncomfortable seeing male genitalia, here are some counseling resources that you should seek in an attempt to re-educate yourself. I spoke at SUNY Cortland this last week, which was, of course, the school up in New York. And they had a sign in their bathroom, only their women's bathroom, not their men's bathroom, because I had my husband go in the men's and check, only the women's, that said, do you feel like someone is using the wrong bathroom? Don't stare at them, don't challenge them, don't insult them, don't purposefully make them feel uncomfortable, but do respect their privacy, do respect their identity, and do carry on with your day. Basically, and translation, what that is saying is ignore your gut instinct, let down your walls, let down your boundaries as women, shut up, be quiet, and take your pants off. I mean, it's insane. So all of that to say about the whole sexual crime thing, speaking for myself and the overwhelming majority of girls at that meet who were faced with this, it certainly felt like a sex crime.
Well, and I think that the rules that the Biden just laid down specifically include locker rooms to be one of those places where gender identity trumps sex as a right. The only exceptions that they noted were the single sex living facilities and athletics in their fact sheet summary, whatever. And so, which right there tells you that, well, if there are exceptions, I think someone mentioned if there are exceptions for sex, for anything, aren't you just admitting something? Riley, you just said, well, you're just admitting that Thomas is actually a guy because you had to make this unisex. So again, this is part of the conflation, the confusion, the hypocrisy that's in these rules. But I think all the more reason why some of our complaints or challenges ought to go specifically in this locker room setting, because it's unconscionable that we would continue to basically have a policy of entrapment for young women in which their agency is completely lost, the ability for them to have any kind of privacy and ability to act on their instincts now is being not only disregarded, but basically denied entirely. It shouldn't stand, and we all know it, but we've still got a long road ahead here to try to undo this damage.
Absolutely. I really appreciated the way Riley put that, because if you strip away the poor oppressed man dressed as a woman and women's empathy being weaponized against him, you just have a guy exposing himself to women when they're vulnerable. And I think it's really important that we see that for what it is.
I'm grateful that this Icons, the lawsuit that Icons is funding here with Riley and others, this whole area of the locker room, and that's why they're challenging the university system of Georgia as well on these points of exposure and decency and all these sort of related laws, which I think is a really important part of this challenge.
I just wanted to chime in because I see a lot of comments about how depressing this all is. It's very depressing. It was a very hard weekend. We anticipated this would happen because the Biden administration has been promising this. However, when it actually comes through, it is gutting, and it has set us back in ways. But I also want to remind everybody that stories like Riley's and so many of the other girls on this lawsuit suing, and stories that we're hearing every day, these girls in West Virginia, more and more speaking out in a situation where kind of the guardrails are off now. Imagine the situations that are going to come out of this. It's terrifying and horrible. But this is going to escalate extremely quickly, and we don't live in an ideological world, the gender ideology world. We live in the real world. And as more and more coaches and athletes and parents are confronted with this themselves, the more rise up every day. We all understand that the majority of people are against this, whether they've been able to find their voice yet or not. Sharing the stories is how we were able to find these plaintiffs that are on this trailblazing lawsuit. This is my son. And sharing the firsthand testimonies that are so powerful that athletes like Riley are giving is how we're going to overcome this. And so continue to speak about it, tell your leadership in charge, and we're certainly not rolling over. Riley has not signed off on the lawsuit and said, "Oh, we give up. This is a 3-day-old regulation change, and therefore we're going to throw 53 years out the window." I mean, are you kidding me? This is definitely going to be confronted with a freight train for the next generation of athletes, because we're not going to give up. So do not lose hope. Absolutely push forward and continue for these stories to come out. We mentioned the San Jose volleyball player. San Jose State has the #1 number of transfer students in the portal, women transferring off the team over this past year. So
And it opens up again May 1st, the portal.
opens up again. Coaches that have athletes on teams that have been exposed publicly that have a male athlete on the team, extremely difficult to recruit to a team where when you can Google the team, you see, oh, they're hosting a male athlete. I am not going to send my daughter to a team that is going to she's going to have to undress 18 times a week in the same locker room. So this is the reality that's going to come head on with the ideology, and reality will win. It's a matter of time. All of us together are going to shrink that time. We already have. However, we need to push harder now than we have even in the past.
And to Marshy's point, the story they broke last December, Icons broke last December about University of Washington. It was a 2025 class of 2025 athlete. They've yet to recruit anyone in that class since then, since the story broke. They decommitted that athlete, but in replace, like, because to that point, parents and athletes don't want to go to a school that would have allowed that to happen.
And for everyone here who, no matter what political party you're in, what I've noticed is it's really important to have one-on-one or small group conversations with people. The number of people who don't watch the news or who aren't maybe involved in sports at this time because of however old their kids are or they are, and you tell them these stories and they don't believe, like, they think, oh, it was only like a handful and it's all done. They are in shock at what is happening. So continuing to repeat the stories and to let them know the numbers. So in the chat, I put the websites of all 3 organizations, IWF, Icons, and Wolf, and also Our Bodies, Our Sports, because we're going to be doing rallies starting at the end of May, all of us. And it's so important to continue to get the word out, because when you're in it, you think everybody knows about it, but they don't, and they don't know the depth of what is happening here and what is happening to girls. And I just want to read this. I got a text. So from playing at William and Mary, I have a group chat with a bunch of former players who 2 are Division I coaches. And one said about I was on Fox today. I just found the segment and watched on my phone. My 23-year-old son, who was overhearing it and was unaware of who I am, literally says to me, "That woman just said the best statement of all. Where are the adults in the room?" Because he too feels adults need to speak up and speak out for the kids experiencing this. So again, just keep talking about it, keep getting people to speak up. They don't believe that this is real. And as far as the girls in the locker room, the other thing that hasn't been brought up, obviously there's the psychological issues for these girls who are having to be in the locker rooms. But when you look at think about how at the highest levels and even at the youngest levels, the littlest thing can affect your competition. So how many of these girls are not performing as well either because they're in a locker room with a guy, right? I mean, that in itself, even if they have brothers and have seen all that, they're not expecting a guy in the locker room. And that is definitely affecting them.
One of the things that Charlie Baker of the NCAA admitted to a senator, and I wrote an article about this right around the time that the lawsuit came out, was that Senator Mike Lee from Utah asked, has the NCAA assessed the physical, emotional, or psychological harm to female athletes of its transgender inclusion policy? And his response was no, the NCAA has done no research on its policy. And I think right there, that exposure, that was a pretty bombshell admission to recognize how there's been a complete disregard. I guarantee that this administration has done no research on the harm to young women of this policy that they're going to be put into place, and any kind of athletic policy that they might choose as well. And so I think that's something that we really need to get into the conversation. And the challenge becomes to any university, as you mentioned, Kim, it's such a good idea to reach out to the the universities we have association with, and to have others say, what is your policy? And have you ever assessed the harm to women? What's going on here? Because I don't think they don't have an answer for that, and there hasn't been any research. And I think it's a real fault line for where things stand right now for these inclusion policies.
That's absolutely true. And if you look at the athletics notice of proposed rulemaking, what was so frustrating was how just effusive they were about wanting to protect the feelings of these males who had to be in female spaces and female sports, and how necessary it was for them to feel complete and for them to attain everything that they're trying to attain. And not a word about for the women who object. It's all, bigotry. And so I do, again, we're going to put down below an opportunity to comment to the NCAA about what their policy should be. They specifically want to hear from female athletes. There is also the special rapporteur for the UN, Reem Al-Salam, requested a call for input on violence against women athletes, and included this idea of male and female spaces, males and female sports. And maybe we can drop a link to that also down below. But we're already over our allotted time. Maybe we can take one more question and then wrap it up. You have another, Sharon?
Yeah, this is kind of coming up quite a bit in both the comments and on the Q&A. And so are there strategies or are there arguments that seem to work better than others? And I would say on two fronts. One is talking to people just in real life, right, who don't know yet, who haven't figured out that this is even happening. And then two, talking to elected officials, right, and making and kind of holding them accountable. And I think various people, you all have some experience of this, so but that one's been coming up quite a bit.
I will say one thing that I have noticed in terms of what is effective and what is successful, and something that I try and implement in all of my interactions around this debate, is, weirdly enough, using their own intersectional language kind of against them in a way, if that makes sense. So for example, when I was testifying before Congress, now I'm not saying stoop to their level. It kind of, I feel like I'm stooping to their level sometimes, but Representative Lee, she's a Democrat from Pennsylvania. This was the Oversight and Accountability, one of the subcommittees, and so she was the ranking member of this subcommittee. And she starts to read her opening monologue, and the first thing that she says is, "I can't believe that I have to sit here and listen to this transphobic bigotry," referring to, of course, myself and the other Republican witnesses who were there to testify, ultimately urging the Biden administration to halt with their illegal administrative rewrite of Title IX. And I was so baffled by this, because, again, this is a sitting member of Congress, the beating heart of the American Republic, and she doesn't try to dissuade from the stance that I've taken with logic or reasoning or common sense or lived experience or science. What happened to follow the science? No, instead resorts to name calling. And so it's my turn to read my testimony, and I read my testimony, and at the very end, I didn't even really mean to say this, but it accidentally just came out of my mouth. But I looked at her and I said, "Representative Lee, if my testimony makes me transphobic, then understand, by your own logic, your opening monologue would make you a misogynist," which, as you can imagine, sent the hearing into a tailspin. It was as if she had to factory reset. I don't think she knew what the word misogynist meant. Her staff comes running over, her counsel comes running over. They're pulling out their phones. I literally think they looked up the definition. because about 60 seconds later, she raised her hand and she said, I want her words removed from the record on the grounds of engaging in personalities, whatever that means. But anyways, let it be known, congressional record still stands. She is, in fact, a misogynist. But my line of thinking there is, if being pro-woman, which is the stance that I've taken, my stance, I don't stand against anything. I am very strategic in my languaging, or my language and my framing of the argument, always making it seem as if, you know, we are standing for something. We're standing for fairness, for safety, for privacy. We're standing for reality, and we're standing for women. If being pro-woman is immediately deemed anti-trans, then wouldn't being pro-trans inherently be anti-woman? And what do we call someone who's anti-woman? We call them a misogynist. But I think it's effective too in you know, asking questions almost in a way that they can't say they don't agree with. So asking them, well, do you believe women deserve fairness? What are they going to say? No. Do you believe women deserve safety? I think there's a lot of commonality between the two sides, ultimately, really, weirdly enough. I think we both want everyone to compete. We both want fairness. We both want safety. We just have skewed perceptions on what that looks like. So that's what I've seen be effective. And I will say one more thing that I will not do. And I've learned this. I certainly haven't always been as firm or secure in my stance, considering when I first came out, I kind of adhered to all the pronoun stuff. I thought it was kind. I thought it was respectful. I thought, you know, that was necessary if I wanted to make my point. But I've learned so much about how important language is. So I will not refer to these individuals as trans women or trans men. It's just male and female. Why are we muddying the waters? It's just man and woman. Even, like, I won't even say biological woman, because it's as if we're like subconsciously admitting that there's an unbiological alternative to being a woman. And that's the first step in their game. Honestly, I think when we do that, we're playing their game. Same thing with even the verbiage of sex reassignment surgery. I won't say that because it admits that I think someone can reassign their sex through surgery, which you can't. There's no amount of surgery. There's no amount of hormones. There's nothing you can do that would change who God perfectly and intentionally created you to be in his. I don't know, language, it matters a whole lot. So be mindful of the words that we use, because they really do carry a lot of weight.
That's a great point, Riley. And I think, Wolf, we wholeheartedly endorse that approach. We're going to wrap things up now, but I want to say a huge thanks to the panelists. I know all of you are probably very much in demand right now as everybody tries to figure out what this rule means. So we really appreciate you being here and breaking it down in the face of great difficulty, because really, I mean, I read the 1,500-page rule, most of it over the weekend. In a lot of places, I still don't know what it's saying, and I do think that's intentional. But this was really helpful hearing from all of you. And also appreciate everybody who joined us in the audience. So thanks very much. Bye-bye.